People ask me sometimes, isn't suffering good for the soul? I've heard this maybe in a religious context. Isn't it a necessary part of the human experience? See, here's the thing. When religious leaders who don't know how to stop suffering are asked by people, how can I stop suffering? And they don't know how to stop it. It's a very clever answer to give that, oh, suffering is good for you. It's good for your soul. God wants you to suffer. If it were true that suffering was good for the soul, then God must be very, very happy, because there's nothing but appalling suffering going on everywhere in the world right now. Must be a very happy world from the perspective of God. A world of suffering. And so if suffering was really good for you, why wouldn't you plan on doing it? Make suffering part of your plan. Suffering actually should be foreign to life. Suffering is something that should be foreign to the human condition. Here we are born with the 100 billion neuron brain, and we should be using the whole thing. What causes suffering is when on a daily basis we accumulate stress and we don't have the ability to release the stress daily. The computing power of our brain, which should be available to meet the demands of the environment in an interactive fashion. See what happens? A demand is made on you. A demand that says change of expectation. And then if you can engage that demand, interact with it with an abundance of creativity, adaptation, stability, then you'll have a successful interaction with the demand. And when you interact successfully with a demand, you get a wave of happiness. That wave of happiness comes. In the opposite situation, a demand is made on you. And it's a demand of change. To change your expectation, to change your behavior, to change something. And if you can't draw upon the fountainhead of creativity, intelligence, stability, adaptability, then you can't meet the demand successfully. And when we fail to meet a demand successfully, we're not interacting, we are reacting. We try to make the demand go away by fighting it, and that won't work, or by fleeing from it. This fight, flight, reactivity, we call in physiological language stress. Stress is the tendency to respond to a demand for change by fighting and fleeing, reacting rather than interacting. And what happens when we accumulate stress? Our brain becomes overloaded with all the memories of the colors, the smells, the situation, and all of that, in which we were at a time when we got stressed. It's stressed by the thing that stressed us, and it continues to have stress reactivity in the face of exposure to anything that has the same color, the same smell, the same sound, the same flavor, the same anything that that moment of stress had. And then our brain starts to become a storage house for holding on to all of these impressions of past stress experiences. And the amount of available brain computing power that's available for us to meet new demands interactively, this begins to be reduced in percentage. One of my mentors, Sir John Eccles, the Nobel Prize winning neurologist, told me that about 2% of the average person's available brain power is available to them because 98% of the brain's capacity to compute is being used up and holding on to stress. And this state is just inevitable, that with greater and greater regularity, we're going to continue behaving in ways that are reactive instead of interactive. And that reactive thing, we can call that stress experience, we call that suffering. Suffering was good for you, And if it was spiritually good for you, then why not just sit down and plan it out and make sure you do lots of it? Nobody would ever plan suffering. As this is an excuse that we use when we don't know how to make a thing go away. We say, oh, it's good for you, you know. Like, you know, I cut my finger when I was slicing the bread. Oh, it's good for me, you know, occasionally to get a cut because, you know, then I learn all about first aid and things, you know. Why not just go and cut your fingers every day, because then you'll really be an expert in first aid. You know, the thing is, suffering is actually a waste of time. It's not necessary. It's a waste of time. Using our full mental potential. With Vedic meditation twice a day, we dive in, our body gains that level of the deepest possible physiologic rest, and we're peeling away layers of stress reactivity, peeling away layers of accumulated stress, allowing our physiology to be liberated and allowing our brain to be liberated so that we have maximum capability to interact effectively with the demands of time, with the demands of the environment. Suffering should become less and less by this. Life should be lived without suffering. This is our policy.